warm welcome to another edition of To The Point. Recently, Censor Board has courted many controversies for its arbitrary way of functioning. And after all the adverse publicity, government constituted a committee to look into the certification matters. But what is going to be the fate of this committee, which has recently submitted its report to the government? It's anybody's guess. Joining me now is one of the finest filmmakers and also the person who is the chairman of this committee. Welcome, Mr. Shyam Benegal, on To The Point. Mr. Benegal, before we go into the nuances of what the committee report is going to bring about, but I would just like to begin with the recent Udta Punjab controversy which came into light, and then the Bombay High Court coming in its favor. Do you really feel that this judgment in some way is going to prove to be a turning point as far as functioning of the censor board is concerned?
Well, in some ways it is, because you see, it's clearly the Central Board of Film Certification. Note the term film certification,
Right,
not censorship. So when the film Udta Punjab was shown to the CBFC, and when they decided to award it 19 or 20 cuts or whatever, I don't know the actual number, and various things, and to excise a certain amount of dialogue from it or words from it and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, which meant that the film itself would be damaged beyond any kind of repair. So, when the matter went up to the High Court clearly said the film should be released in its original fashion, except for the opening sequence where there happened to be a certain amount of obscenities in the lyrics of the song and so on and so forth, which they obviously...
Many filmmakers, in fact, said that CBFC actually reached its height of absurdity, demanding 89 cuts, then reducing it to 13, and then finally court just passing away with one. What would you really have to say as far as the demanding the cuts is concerned?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't like to comment on what somebody else has done, because that has nothing to do with my committee. Now, we are looking into the overall, the overall thing in terms of the principles and the manner in which the Board of Certification should function. It has nothing to do with individual cases, and it has nothing to do with personalities. That, let me make it absolutely clear, it doesn't have anything to do with people who are in charge, this, that, and the other, because, there's always this temptation to make comparisons. And in this case, there's no question of making any kind of comparisons. We are looking at it in terms of how do you deal with cinema, which is actually, it has two aspects to it, as you well know. One is the creative aspect. It is it's an art form. Cinema is a form of art. It also has a commercial side to it, because where it becomes a product to be consumed, and therefore, that it has a commercial thing, which is very important to it, because otherwise you probably wouldn't be able to make a film.
But so when you're looking at the commercial side of the film, many people, a layman, that's how a layman sometimes perceives that this controversy was needless. Maybe it's been done for the sake of publicity. Now, for example, again, I would give you just a recent example of Udta Punjab. There were allegations that, this film was used as a political vehicle, and, also as a platform where government would applaud its own efforts. So does it really happen? I'm not saying that you comment on Udta Punjab, but you yourself are such a veteran filmmaker. Your films also have gone through scissors and, the scissor happy attitude of the censor board you have also faced in the past. Does it really happen that way, that the commercial side of filmmaking really forces you to stoop to such a level?
Well, if you are actually honest to your craft and to your art, I don't think you need to stoop to any level.
Okay.
But there are subjects that if you take a certain kind of subject and it requires, the idiom of that film, is of a kind. Let's say if I'm doing a film about a particular uh, section of society or a particular part of India where the common idiom, the language that is spoken, would probably have punctuations of obscenities as punctuation. Now, language use, as you well know, colloquial languages, in different parts of India have that sort of thing, depending on what class, and of the community we are talking about, and so on and so forth. Now, to use all of that correctly, you may sometimes use, a certain kind of language, which may not seem to a lot of people that there's full of vulgarities, etc., etc. But then, where it is necessary, where it in fact is gives you the real sense of what it is, it should be allowed, surely. But these are the questions where this is a very thin line that divides
Right.
both these things. So, if you each often one opinion against another. So you sometimes need to argue your case in front of people. Particularly in the case of authority like the CBFC, and so on and so forth. Now, having said all that, now if it is a question of, say, a film like Udta Punjab, the problem there was that it seemed to, for a lot of people, or rather, there was a section of there was a section of comments, let me put it that way. There were comments saying that it actually is against the state of Punjab.
Right. Do you believe so? That
No,
it's against the
I
state of
don't.
Punjab?
I don't. No, I don't at all. As a matter of fact, I've said that then, I've said today. It's the film deals with a very important problem that, in fact, is something that the government of Punjab itself is seized with, is attempting to get rid of. And if the film doesn't attack the government of Punjab.
But many times, Mr. Benegal, we see that CBFC tries to be oversensitive to issues, and it'll take a high moral ground. Many times it has happened, and recently, I mean, I wouldn't go name the persons, but of course, the CBFC chairman, he was supposed to be making CBFC into a sanskari institution, and that is when the allegations like these come up. How do you think? Do you really feel that before the CBFC chairman, the task is really uphill to balance all these emotions, and how challenging is it really for the chairperson of the
See,
CBFC?
there are two things. There's essentially, you have to remember, there's something, whatever actions, there is something known as a positive action.
Okay.
And then there's a normative action. Now, the positive action is like, you act straight off it's
Right.
with definition of, between negative and positive. That kind of thing. It's kind of between black and white. But normative is you are taking into consideration the society in which you live. So when you take if any kind of action there, you are working towards, a certain kind of, on the basis of accepted social norms.
Right.
On the basis of that. So I have a feeling that CBFC is looking at cinema in normative terms.
Okay.
Okay. Now the fact is, yes, there are certain things you can say or do which would probably be absolutely, cut and thrust kind of ways, and make the difference between blacks and whites and so on and so forth. But when you talk about society, it's the different shades of grey. It's not just black and white. So we are really talking about, in this case, normative. What is normative, and what is not. In some cases, yes, you may probably take a kind of a view that is absolutely positive as against negative.
Right. Well, I think that there is a point in what you're saying, Mr. Benegal, but many times we've seen that there is a blurring of lines. When you look at CBFC, there is a very thin line which you see, at least for a common man on the street, he would get confused between certification and censorship. Again, I would come to what you were telling me earlier. Uh, why is there this line is so blurred? Why can't one make a clear distinction that this is certification and this censorship? Because it's become a joke that CBFC has a scissor happy attitude. How would CBFC really shake off this perception, which in itself it is itself responsible for this, bringing this kind of a perception?
Well, it's very simple. The fact is that, when you excise or you remove portions of a film, that is censorship. Now, when you're certifying a film, it means you're certifying it in terms of its suitability for one
For a particular
section
set
or
of
another
audience.
section of the community. There may be sensitivities in one section of the community about something, then they may object to that particular film. You have to consider such matters. But those matters does not automatically assume the proportion that you'll have to cut the film.
But what are you, sir, in favor of? Many actors with whom we spoke to, they have said that there should be no censorship, there should only be certification. What is your view, really?
My view is the same, that there should be certification. Maybe our at the present what we have is you give a universal certificate, which means that everybody can see a film.
Right.
Then you have a UA certificate, which means that the people between one age and another, until a certain age, you cannot see it. Say, for people who are under 12 or under 15 or whatever, and then then you have an adult certificate that is for people only above the age of 18.
Right.
Now, there are three. At the moment, there are only three classifications like this. Now, these are probably not quite adequate.
Okay, so is your new report, like which you have submitted to the government, is it moving away from censorship to
No,
certification?
we are suggesting, broadly speaking, we are suggesting that we should have different kinds of certifications.
Okay.
Like, say, for instance, you have a universal certification, then you have for plus 12, then for plus 15 in terms of age, and then adults
Okay.
above 18.
Right.
So what happens is that you classify the film as being suitable universally for those suitable for people above the age of 12,
Okay.
suitable for people above the age of 15, and suitable for people above the age of 18, which means adults.
Right.
Now, broadly speaking, you do that in order that you don't necessarily touch the film.
Okay.
You don't cut the film. You classify it in such a way, and then also even within the adult, you have generally for adults to see the film, but there may be certain kinds of films which may have excess of violence or perhaps even, because it usually has to do with sex and violence.
Right, but Mr. Benegal, but the most contentious part always has been the Section 5B1 of the Cinematograph Act, which has always been talked about because it refers to phrases like morality, then decency, public order. How will you really ensure that censorship doesn't happen in the garb of all these things?
That's the whole thing. You see, that's why I said to meet the sensibilities of everybody, if you have classifications, the greater number of classifications rather than what we now have. Because even an adult, as I said, you have an adult classification, and then you have adult with caution, like, say, for instance, for those people who, those kind of films where you probably have explicit kind of sex, depiction of sex. Now, something like that probably you allow that kind of film to be seen, but you restrict it in terms of the geographical space where you can show the film, and probably in terms of time,
Okay.
so that you don't have screenings in cinemas which are in residential areas, or to have screenings through the day
But what
where
happens?
you limit it to,
Right.
say, 11 o'clock at night, that sort of thing.
But sir, is your report really going to deal with the broad aspect of the fact that an Udta Punjab controversy doesn't get repeated? For example, they were seeking an adult certificate for the film, but despite that, there were so many cuts, and not one or two, but it was like almost 89, then 13. So, how would you avoid a situation like this that it doesn't happen?
You see, it's not likely to happen again,
Okay.
because after the High Court judgment on Udta Punjab, I don't think it's likely to get repeated.
Okay.
Because that's more or less, it settles
So
that
probably this
matter.
judgment is going to be a watershed judgment.
In many ways, it is a watershed judgment.
Okay.
And I don't think such problems are likely to occur in the future.
Okay.
So there will be a precedent now.
Okay.
So you can't possibly have that sort of thing happening all over again. Having said that, the fact is that you can have other kinds of problems, constantly, because after all, human beings, human experience is something that is vast, and it's not something you can sort of contain very easily.
So you've submitted your report to the government, but how hopeful are you that the government is really going to adopt the report and implement it? As what we have seen, the precedence is there. There was a Justice Mudgal committee report, which was basically consigned to the dustbin. Then earlier there was a Khosla committee report which came. So how hopeful are you really that the government is really going to implement the report?
You see, all reports, they are implemented in part or in totality.
Okay.
But what happens is they cannot be something, it's not absolute, because society changes, social mores change,
Okay.
ways of looking at things change, so many things happen. So it's a dynamic. And if you're looking at society in these terms, then there will be, from time to time, you would have to review, you would have to look at things. Like, for instance, even the kind of report that we may have submitted.
But do you feel that this
is not-
periodic review has been happening regularly? I mean, you've
No, but what I'm trying to say is that now, if you look at the history of all this, you'll find that from time to time you have to make course corrections.
right.
So when new reports come, what is it? What is that report doing? It's making a course correction according to the requirements of society at that time. So that's the process. So you have to look at it in those terms. You cannot, these are not absolute things, I mean, they're not carved in stone. I mean,
So it does get reviewed periodically, and then, with time, the changes also take place, as what you're saying. But in the case of CBFC, and especially the way the chairman of the body have functioned, like from the neoliberal Vijay Anand, what we saw during the NDA 1, and now we come to the ultra-orthodox Pehlaj Nilani, almost we see that CBFC has almost come a full circle. How would a chairperson really balance out the ideologies and the parties to which they are associated? Because after all, they are all government appointees, and they are government under they are working under a government body.
Well, although I mean, I can comment on it, but I will not comment on it simply because I have, there is a committee which I happen to head, and we have given a report on the subject. Therefore, it's pointless for me to even comment, and it wouldn't even be correct for me or ethical on my part to comment on what the situation is with the CBFC at present, nor with the personalities that you have mentioned. Because I cannot possibly comment on that. So, and I will not. You see, because that's neither here nor there. Because also, basic point is it's unethical for me to do so.
But Okay, I won't get into that part of the report. But sir, talking specifically about the allegations of corruption, lack of transparency, has your report, I mean broadly, has the report really dealt with that aspect as well?
You see, the fact is there need never be, there is need for confidentiality actually isn't really there.
Okay,
Because when you classify, when there is a whole process of certification, the filmmaker himself can opt for a particular certificate,
okay,
and that the CBFC can look at it from that point of view, not from any other point of view.
okay,
Because the filmmakers sometimes themselves will say, no, I'm not looking for a UA certificate, I'm not looking for a U certificate, I'm looking for an A certificate.
right.
But sometimes what happens is the filmmaker will say, no, I'm sorry, you cannot give me an A certificate because I'm really looking for a universal certificate. By getting an A certificate, I'm going to lose, this film is going to lose money.
Okay.
You can,
Right.
it's up to the filmmaker and the producer and the people who are in the trade to decide what kind of certificate they would like. So that the CBFC can look at it from that point of view. They don't have to judge the film because in any case, it's the job of the CBFC is specifically to look at it and say certify it on the basis of what kind of classifications they have.
Right. But so the first process of certification generally is the set of people who are there in the examining committee. And there have been allegations in the past that people who are comprising that committee, they generally are very insensitive, they are not cinema literate. I mean, in the past it has happened like that. And you also must have faced the problems earlier. Do you think, again, I would not go into the details of what your report exactly says, but how can you really broadly really address this issue as well?
Well, it's how that is a question that will all perennially remain.
Okay,
Because you have to have certain norms on the basis of which you will choose people. You make certain rules, certain kinds of people you require. Obviously, you need people from different kinds of organizations, the NGOs, those who are concerned with the societal problems, women's issues, all these kind of things. You have organizations, women's organizations, those people who look after children's problems and so on and so forth. You have to cast your net among all these various people to get together the groups of people you want.
but sir, your report, does your report look at a complete overhaul of the Cinematograph Act, or it deals with certification and other aspects?
No, we've looked at it as exhaustively as we possibly can.
Because there were a lot of reports I read which were saying that Justice Mudgal committee report was much more exhaustive, and this report was submitted in 2 months' time. So probably it was a piecemeal work.
No,
Just
no, but
allegations coming up.
we have taken a great deal from the earlier reports.
But were
It
these two,
isn't
three
that
months enough to talk to all the stakeholders and?
as you see, we had met all the stakeholders in the process of working out the report. We have done that. Those exercises were already, I mean, we have already gone through those exercises. It's nothing that needs to be done on that score. And also, there's a lot of water has gone under the bridge. I mean, this is not something new. It's been going on for a long time. We've had reports in the past. As I said, essentially the process is of creating course corrections, and where maybe there are fundamental problems that need to be addressed, we will address those fundamental problems.
But so another which a sticky issue which has come before the media as well regarding CBFC is the appointments of the chairman, the appointment of the other members. Apparently, what I read is that your report is also cutting down the strength of the board members from 25 to 9 regional centers. But my broad question to you is that how would you really ensure that the government interference is cut to a minimum? And again, as I said, that it's after all a government-run body. How would you ensure that the government doesn't intervene and the things happen the way it should be?
I mean, you see, when you say there are certain, it's meant to be autonomous, right?
Okay.
Now, if it's meant
At
to
least
be
on paper.
that I wouldn't be able to tell. It depends entirely on the relationship that the government has or the kind of people. You see, there are certain things that are what one might call gentlemen's agreements. You know, you have to be, let's say, ethical about what you're doing. The government does have a say because the government has set up that institution. You know, government will have a say at some stage, but by and large, its autonomy should be maintained.
But sir, we've seen instances where the chairman gets overzealous, hypersensitive, and there's kind of a vigilantism which is seen on the part of him. How do you really read that?
That's precisely what I'm trying to say. You see, you have to follow the rules of the game. If you don't follow the rules of the game, then what's the point of it in the first place?
Okay.
You shouldn't say it is autonomous if you don't have autonomy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we can hope and that the government is going to adopt the report and soon announce whatever the conclusions have been. But my last question to you, sir, is that should I be in a position to say that Mr. Shyam Benegal will be successful in taking away the scissors from CBFC?
I hope so. Because I do believe that if anybody should use the scissors, it should be the person who's made the film.
Okay.
Because the creator of that film has every right to use the scissors, nobody else.
Thank you so much, Mr. Benegal, for coming on To The Point.
Thank
you
you
so much.
Thank you.
That's it on this episode of To The Point. See you next time with another personality. Goodbye and thanks for watching.